Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are at. My name is Melissa Wenzel. I work at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency as our Built Environment Sustainability Administrator. And I'm a board member of Reuse. And we've been restarting these webinar opportunities recently throughout this year. And this is the most number of people who are registered to attend an event. And no surprise, we all want to see reuse of building materials happen, and windows for sure need to have a new use. We cannot continue to replace windows and landfill those materials. So again, no surprise that we have 206 people registered today. And we are looking forward to two speakers, one from Minnesota, one from the East Coast, who are both people who focus on reuse and repair of windows over replacement. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh. Again, we're really glad for this opportunity, and let's see what we can do to make movement happen on eliminating replacing of windows and focusing on repairing and reusing windows. Josh, take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you all for being here. If you're not super familiar with Build Reuse, we are glad you found us. I'll be dropping some links in the chat for our website, as well as some other opportunities to make sure you don't miss anything in the future. So like Melissa said, she is a board member of Build Reuse, and we both serve on the Build Reuse Membership and Programming Committee, and we kind of co-host webinars together, like this one. The previous one was the true cost of landfilling C&D material, or construction and destruction waste. And then the one before that was scalable wood reuse. So we have kind of rotating topics that we kind of get through and are definitely learning from the Build Reuse community as to what kind of program offerings they want to see. So if you have an idea for a speaker or a topic, reach out to us or throw it in the chat, and we'd love to explore those opportunities with you all. So yeah, we average a webinar like this about once a month. We're pretty flexible with it, especially as we kind of launch into it. I think this is only the third or fourth one that we've done. So we're glad to have you here with us. And then if you're interested in kind of smaller group discussions, we have BRAGs, which are Build Reuse Affinity Groups. Those conversations are limited to about 10 people and are kind of focused on executive operations, as well as marketing, programming, and fund development for any business, organization, government that is pursuing local or not local circular building economies. So if you aren't a Build Reuse member, consider looking into that so you don't miss any offerings that we have in the future. We're gonna get things started here in just a minute. For questions, hopefully we'll all have lots of good questions to ask Joe and Alison. Save the questions for the end. We'll have a Q&A at the very end there, or you can just pop them in the chat and then we can moderate them at the end. But yeah, hope you enjoy, and I will pass things off to Joe and Alison.
All right, Josh, thank you so much for that great introduction. I want to pass on my gratitude to Josh and Melissa for putting this together. It seems like a really fun, just a really great series of webinars, and I feel honored that you asked us to present on this. It's a topic that's obviously really near and dear to us, as we get up every morning and restore windows as part of the businesses we run. And so you know, for us, this is like, you know, what we're going to cover today is obviously really important, and it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we could actually cover. And then also Josh and I, you know, really great kind of history that we have. Josh also is with Rethos, a local preservation organization. So we have years of background kind of co-hosting hands-on kind of homeowner DIY workshops as well. So definitely something that we could talk about more toward the end if we get into a Q&A section. So Josh, want to go over to the next slide? Great. Alison, would you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit about how you got into the position you're in today? Yeah.
Thanks everybody for being here. I know it's tough to find time in the middle of the day, but and sometimes it's easier to find time in the middle of the day and you don't forget about it as much as at the end of the day. I'm here from Amesbury, Massachusetts, which is practically New Hampshire, on the seacoast, and we deal with buildings, very, very old buildings to new buildings. So anything from 1650 to 1950 is is our scope of coverage. So you always have to be on your toes as to what changed over the centuries with windows. I have a crew of 14. We have our 5,000 square foot shop, and I've been restoring windows for 21 years. You'll also see I have my WPA sign behind me. I'm also the founder, one of the founders of the Window Preservation Alliance, which is a trade group of window restorers all across the country and including Canada.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. Yeah, so my name is Joe Hayes. I'm the owner and founder of Hayes Window Restoration based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so we generally serve the Twin Cities, and then occasionally we'll get out to some of the kind of the older communities, like older building stock, out to Excelsior, Lindstrom, Northfield, some of those areas as well. But you know, when I was new in this, I found the WPA, the Window Preservation Alliance, as a trade group and joined. And Allison and then another restorer, Mark Bagala, have been in a mentor role for me. So I just want to share my gratitude to Allison for her work in elevating the craft to something that's professional, and then also in her willingness to share so many important insights to running a business like this well. So thank you, Allison. It's great to have you co-presenting today. Yeah, Josh, slide. Yeah, so today, the kind of overview of how our talk will go is we kind of just wanted to start out by sharing the importance of windows and architecture. It's like, you know, kind of like that innate sense of like why this is important and why we have such a great turnout for a talk like this. And then we'll move on and cover kind of like the key things that we see go wrong with old windows and the main things that we can do about those. We'll dive into 5 key reasons why you want to restore windows rather than replace windows. And then we'll save some time at the end for question and answer as well. So just to jump in and talk about the purpose of windows. I mean, you look around at buildings throughout history, and windows are a key architectural feature. So functionally, they provide, you know, obviously natural light. Many windows you can open to achieve ventilation. With that opening, you're also, you know, creating the opportunity for drafts, cold and water to get in. And so you want there to be an element of weatherization to those functional windows. And then there's a connection when you're inside to a view and a connection with the outside world. So, you know, for those reasons, windows are really important in architecture. And so, so that's the functional piece. As far as aesthetics, you know, in Minnesota, the oldest window that we worked on was from the 1850s. Allison, I'm kind of jealous. You can go back another 2 centuries on that. But as you go through all this building history of, you know, the built environment in North America we're working, you get experience, you get hands-on experience to understand how were windows built at a certain time, what were the key defining architectural and aesthetic features, and we really get to gain an appreciation for how important that is to kind of, you know, a building feeling right for its era, for the character, for the originality of it, which just adds to the sense of you know, of proportion and just a pleasing sense of how that building comes together aesthetically. And then, you know, of course, historical significance, you know, what we're just talking about with aesthetics, that ties in with the historical significance of, you know, just like our built environment being like literally like the literal fabric that makes up the communities and the cities that we live in. And so the importance of maintaining what's original, of course, as we get into, you know, speaking more about, you know, reuse, it's like there's a lot of embodied energy on this. And so along with that, there's the historical significance of the craftspeople who built these windows, the original material and the character that's inherent in that material, and wanted to take a moment to say, hey, this stuff's good, let's keep this going. This is historical, and once it's gone forever. So let's see what we can do to take care of it. So Allison, anything you want to add there in terms of like windows and architecture?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one of the things that I find fascinating working in New England is that it's very easy to track the transition from hand-built window sash to factory-built window sash. And it's one of my favorite things to explain to homeowners who, you know, we geek out about windows, so we know the obscure details. But once they learn it, then they have a new appreciation for their building. And, you know, if you still have a window that was built in 1810, that's pretty amazing. So that's why they do tell a story, and they do have details that give us clues.
That's great. Yeah, so to jump in, and for those of you particularly, if you live in an old house, you probably experience some pain points that we're going to be talking about soon with old windows. But the cool thing about these old windows is that they were made to be repaired. So we'll jump into that. We'll then move into the 5 key things, 5 key reasons that we see that you can for restoring over replacement, and then again Q&A at the end. So Josh, slide. Alison, you want to speak a little bit to the kind of the what goes wrong piece?
Sure. I think one of the things that I always caution homeowners is just because the paint is bad does not mean the window is bad. They often look terrible, but trust me, until you have a professional look at it, you can't really say it's beyond repair. We have repaired a lot of things that are a box of parts. But certainly the glazing putty on the outside is something we always see. Paint is always the sacrificial layer on a window. And certainly broken glass is probably one of the easiest repairs to do.
Yeah, that's right. So if you live in an old home, you very well may have experienced some of the things that you see in the photos here with severely deteriorated putty, cracked and failing paint, jams where condensation builds up and causes a lot of paint failure, broken sash cords and windows becoming inoperable. And then also as things age, we see drafts can form between where there should be a seal between the glass and the wood. With failing putty and missing putty, you can get drafts between the glass and the wood. You can also have drafts or air infiltration between the sash and the jamb, so air getting around that moving part of a window. Or sometimes there can be, we oftentimes see, true to era, weather stripping, like interlocking metal weather stripping from the early 1900s that gets misaligned, gets bent out of shape. Maybe somebody came in and did some repair work, but didn't install things correctly at the end of that repair. So those are some reasons why windows may be draftier than they need to be. Old growth wood that these windows are made out of is generally pretty rot resistant, but things can start to rot over time. There's traditional mortise and tenon joinery that can fail. And then, we also see, missing or dated storm windows. So a storm window, we think about original windows as the original double pane window when you think about the primary window combined with a storm window. And so if you have a storm window that's really leaky, you're thinking about, something I heard nicknamed finger guillotines the other day, where you get all those missing, missing tabs and those sliding glass panels want to slide down. Those tend to be pretty inefficient as draft stops, or when they're gone altogether. It really takes away from a window's ability to perform well in harsher climates. And then, as Alison started out, like a lot of people they'll look at broken cords, they look at broken glass, failing paint, a window that feels cold in the winter, and they feel like, oh my gosh, like I've been getting these ads in the mail about replacement for years. Maybe it's time to do that. When in reality, so much of what goes into an old window and what goes wrong with an old window is ripe for repair rather than just tossing it out. So
yeah, I think one of the hardest things that I hear is when somebody say, I had to replace my windows. I hope there's no window police going around insisting that people have to replace their windows. So before you say those words, please consult somebody who is an expert in windows so we can tell you if you actually have to replace your windows or not.
Yes, a colleague of ours, David Hoggart, who works out of North Carolina, I remember it, he has a quote of saying he's never met a window he hasn't been able to restore. So there's really a lot that we can do with these, even if they look pretty rough. So Josh, slide. So, of course, as Alison mentioned, we can dive into, either light touch or much deeper restoration grade paint preparation and painting. We can do full putty removal to remove glass and clean it, and then reset that. These windows, when you have a broken sash cord, once you take a lower sash out, most windows were milled so that the jambs had a little weight pocket access door. So they were made to be repaired. These folks who were designing these in the mill workshops knew, like, yeah, we were putting, in our region, it's rope. Out east, you see a combination of rope or chain that connects the sash to the weight and the jamb. But they knew, hey, these aren't going to last forever. Or these may need to be removed for repair. And so they designed the jamb so that there was an easy way to access that weight to reconnect the sash to the weight with the rope. the installation of permanent weather stripping is can make a huge difference in terms of energy efficiency and stopping draft infiltration. Tuning windows up again, it's like when if a window has one cord broken and one that's not broken, it's literally going to lift one part of the window up and create a draft. So something as simple as getting the sash cords repaired can even help that window can close more tightly. You know, these windows, again, it's with woodworking and the understanding of traditional joinery, like mortise and tenon joinery, we can do rot repairs with epoxy or with wood as well, as seen in that center bottom photo. And then a lot of the stuff, like, you know, here we are, Allison's working out in Massachusetts, we're in the Twin Cities with crews out doing this work every day. There's actually a lot that folks can do on their own. So we spend a lot of time doing DIY oriented education events as well. So teaching workshops on the basics of glass repair, sash cord repair, how to properly reputty and paint a window. So there's really a lot that if somebody wants to dive in and do a project on the weekend or in their basement through the winter, perhaps there's really a lot that's pretty accessible for the avid DIYer.
Yeah, I would just add to it that it's amazing how the range of what we can do goes from very simple to very complex. So it's not a replacement windows, it's one-stop solution. You just stick a new thing in, whereas with window restoration, we really examine what the issues are and what the homeowner concerns are and address those. And it's definitely more piecework than it is whole replacement.
That's right. Yeah, there's really a wonderful ability to customize each project, and you know, a client's priorities may change as they go from the living room to the bedrooms in the back of the house, or as you move from the main level to the second level, and the levels of deterioration may change as well. And so, so it's really normal for us in our kind of consultation process to go through, talk to homeowners, assess windows, find out from them what their main pain points are that they're experiencing, find out what their goals are at the end of the project, and figure out how can we then craft a project where we can give people the most bang for the buck, really hone those projects so that their budget goes the farthest to meet their priorities. Yeah, so it really isn't a one size fits all approach at all. That's a great point, Allison. Yeah. Slide. So for the the main diving into reason number one of like, why is it important? Why do we see it as important to keep original windows in use? Reason number one is preserving historic charm and maintaining architectural integrity. Allison, would you want to start off here?
Yeah, it's fascinating. We often find that the unusual windows are sort of the gateway for window restoration. So if it's an arch top, or if it's a bowed window or a diamond pane, people are often hesitant to replace those because they're special and unique to the house. But even the simple plain windows are unique and special to the house too. So.
Yeah, that's right. And so we, homeowners tend to have a sense of like, they have pain points with the windows. They bring somebody in, from a replacement company, and they look at the products and they see what they're going to get through a window replacement project. And this isn't true for everybody, but for many people, they just get the sense that like, yeah, what's going to come into my house and what's going to leave is just not the right way to go. So you're going to lose that historic charm. You're going to reduce the light size, like the light opening will actually get smaller. You're going to lose historic details like your original hardware, old profiles, kind of the depth of how the casing lines with the trim, how the casing to the sash has a certain level of depth. And so when you go from an original window to a replacement product, you lose that. And once your eye is kind of trained to that, it's really, you can't really unsee it. So it's really, my wife is a little upset with me. We go on walks in our neighborhood, and she just is, there's a lot that stands out to her that she'd rather not see now. But so it's that authenticity, that architectural integrity that we really want to see keep going, because so much of the draw of living in an old house, of course, there's a variety of pain points and things that can be hard with living in an old house, but it's the character that really draws so many people to living in these kinds of buildings. And windows are a key part of that in terms of, connection to the outside world, something that you put your hands on and actually operate. And with the right mindset and with the right restoration project, that can be a really rewarding thing. Anything else there, Allison? Okay, yeah, slide. Allison, would you want to speak to some of the quality, material, durable design, and repairability?
It's interesting that I've had the opportunity to meet with people who build window sash, and the amount of effort and attention they put into selecting good lumber is not new. It's something that's been done for centuries. The windows don't take a lot of lumber, so you can afford to be very, very picky about which lumber you choose. So typically windows that have lasted 100 years are made out of good wood. As we talked about, there's some things that fall apart, but again, they were designed to be taken apart piece by piece so that if a piece fails, you can replace it with a new piece. And again, we spent a lot of time picking lumber so that we could get a good, stable, long-term project, but it's only one small piece of wood. It's not a whole house worth. So.
Yeah. So if we think about the wood that was used in most of our old housing stock, and we talk about old houses, like, you know, in the Twin Cities, I'm generally thinking about homes built prior to World War II. Once you move past World War II, that's where you see a lot of changes come into how windows were designed. So, you know, after World War II, you see a lot of aluminum introduced into jambs. So the rope and pulley system goes away. You'll still see single glazing, but you'll usually see an aluminum storm window as part of the original system versus a wood storm window. So there is still maintainability and repairability in the era that I would maybe name from like the mid 40s up into like the you know, into the 70s. There's a lot of continuity there, although a lot of changes in the counterbalance systems. And so when we talk about original windows, historic or old windows, we're really looking at pre-World War II is generally what we're talking about. And so with that, the lumber that was used tends to be original cut, old growth wood. And so depending on where you are in the country, that wood species may change. So here we are in the upper Midwest, really close to northern pine forest. And so it was eastern white pine that was used for most of the jamb material and the sash material. And so if we think about old growth eastern white pine, these were trees that grew for centuries. They developed really tight growth rings, and they developed a lot of a high concentration of resin or pitch in the wood fibers. And so what that does is when you've got really tight growth rings, as you can see in the photo here, labeled 1918, those tight growth rings make for dense wood that is much more rot resistant compared to the photo where the depiction of the wood from 2018, where you can see really wide growth rings. Those wider growth rings are more prone to pull water in, which then kickstarts the rot process. Heavier growth rings are also much harder for insects to get into, and that high concentration of resin both acts to expel water and insects. And so we're working with a wood. If you take a pine window from 100 years ago and you take a pine window from today, they're going to behave as building materials really, really differently. You know, something that has happened to me pretty often as somebody who gets a lot of calls to say, hey, can you come out and take a look at my windows? You know, a pretty frequent conversation I'll have with somebody will say, hey, I've got some, you know, old storm windows. There's some rot. Can you come take a look? So I'll go out, walk the house with the homeowner and look, and I'll see storm windows that are rotten beyond repair. But what I have to break it to the client over is that these actually aren't original storms. We're not looking at 100-year-old storms that are rotten. Like, these are storm windows. I can tell from the millwork, I can tell from the wood bead rather than a glazing putty that these are probably somewhere in the range of 10 to 20 years old, and they're rotten beyond repair. And so that's just an example of, you know, how new pine just won't last. Whereas if we're looking at old pine, it's actually really durable and worth keeping going if it isn't rotten. So quality material, but, you know, the wood, the hardware, glazing putty lasts a really long time. Once you get into the 60, 80, 100-year mark with putty, it's gotten to a point where it's dry and it's brittle and it can't keep up with seasonal expansion and contraction. However, that putty has had a very long and useful service life, and it's really similar to like the basic paint preparation approach that we can take to re-upping glazing putty. And there are really some relatively low cost ways to do that if we're working on site, set up like an exterior house painting crew to address failing putty. Alison mentioned that glass is a very straightforward thing to repair. Not so straightforward if you've got insulated glass units in a newer type window, but for original windows with single glazing, I've never come across a neighborhood hardware store that doesn't offer glass repair as a service. So if you're able to get that sash out, if you have a handy person who can come help you get it out, you can get it up to the hardware store, and that's a very affordable repair, something that we offer in our shop as well. And then durable design too. Like these windows were made with a tried and true method of joinery called mortise and tenon. And so rather than there being, metal fasteners or open joints, the joinery is such that a slot is cut in one part of the wood, and then a shortened, essentially a square dowel is cut at the other end. And so these pieces fit together in a really tight, snug way, and they end up getting pinned. But those pins are really it's just kind of like a final fastener, but even without those pins, these windows hold together really, really tightly. And it's a type of joinery that lasts very, very long. And once it does start to break down, we can get in there and once glass is removed, once we've removed some paint, we can get in there with some woodworking techniques to firm up that joinery. So these can last for a very long time. Alison, anything else you'd like to speak to there?
Next slide.
Yeah. So, here we are. I'm not sure, you probably see it the same, Alison. Here we are in the upper Midwest, and we are, just inundated with ads telling us how inefficient our old windows are. Are your windows old and drafty? Are they hard to open? Is there old paint? You've got to replace them. So we've already talked about how, well, that's all deferred maintenance that we can address. And so we have the sense that like, no, old windows are right. We want to keep these for our homes. There's all this character here. We can maintain them. We can repair them. But what about that energy efficiency piece? And so, as I mentioned earlier, we think about an original window. A lot of people say, hey, these are single glazed windows. There's one layer of glass. What can we do about that? Shouldn't we put in double pane windows? And in reality, if you just apply your thinking of your understanding of an old window to both the primary window plus the storm window outside of it, you're back to 2 panes of glass. And so there are a lot of studies that have compared upgrades that you can make to original windows with storm windows against the performance compared to the performance of replacement products, and find there's very little to no difference, and certainly not enough difference where you would ever hit a return on your investment if you consider the cost of window replacement and then any energy savings you may have over a series of years in terms of lower energy bills. A lot of studies come in at like the 40 to 60 year mark as far as where you may hit a break-even point in terms of energy savings meeting up with the cost of replacement. The unfortunate thing about that is that if we're, let's say in a 50, let's say it's going to take 50 years, we'll pick out that middle number. Those replacement products, we see they tend to last anywhere from 20 to 30 years. And so to get to that 50-year mark, you're probably actually only going to be, you'll have already done another replacement product or project before you even get close to that break-even point. So just to share a few, you can go online and find all sorts of studies that show that there is a really nominal at best difference in terms of energy efficiency. And so just I pulled out a few here to highlight some of these findings. One is from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and they summarize the results. They said the results of this analysis demonstrate that a number of existing window retrofit strategies come very close to the energy performance of high performance replacement windows at a fraction of the cost. And so that very much meets with our experience working with windows, weather stripping them, getting them to tighten up, and then all the anecdotes that we hear from our clients just letting us know how much more comfortable things feel once they've made those relatively low-hanging fruit investments on their windows. So another study out of the University of Vermont was titled "Testing the Energy Performance of Wood Windows in Cold Climates." And their summary is that the decision to renovate or replace a window should not be based solely on energy considerations, as the difference in estimated first-year savings between upgrade options are small. So then they say other factors to consider include life cycle costs, the historical significance of a window and its role in a building's character, occupant comfort, ease of operation, and like life cycle costing. So, so I added a few links if you guys wanted to dive in. These are pretty, pretty building science heavy reports, but they're kind of fun to read through to see all the different ways that folks have applied updates and weather stripping, updated storm windows, and things like that. So there's lots of different things that were measured, and it all kind of comes out as saying like, yeah, generally, if you can keep your original windows, get some weather stripping, keep the putty up, keep things tuned up so they can shut tightly with hardware, you're going to be in really good shape from an energy efficiency perspective.
Yeah,
Alison?
I would just add that I always encourage people to remember that windows are just part of this whole system of the house. It's often people are standing by a window going, but it's cold. And I see that they're missing their shoe molding, which joins the baseboard to the floor. And that can let a lot of cold up. And it feels like it's the window, but it's not actually the window. So I always encourage people to try to find a building energy scientist to come in with a blower door and an infrared camera and really seek out where those drafts are coming from. And almost every time that we have done that, it's not the windows. There's usually a plumber drilled a hole through something, or an electrician didn't put a cap on something, or just the foundation sagged, and that will cause drafts that you could throw a lot of money at windows and not solve the problem. So it is important to think about the windows as part of the system of the whole house.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alison. Yeah, so when we think about windows and energy efficiency or weatherization, the main thing that people notice if they're attributing cold to a window is they'll feel drafts. So they'll feel air moving around that operable part of the window between the sash and the jamb. If things are bad, they may feel it between the glass and the wood if there's a lot of missing putty, or if there are broken panes. And so simply adding weather stripping can tighten up those gaps where air is getting through. Another way that a window would make a room feel colder is if you put your hand next to glass and it's a cold winter day, that cold will radiate through the glass, and that is true whether for both single pane, double pane, or or if you have a primary window with a storm window. And so that radiant cold comes through, and so it will cool off that space, but you're really not going to get away from that concept even with a replacement window, double pane window. And then another way that a window can cool off a room is through convection. And so if you think about the cold that comes across and that will radiate through the glass, that cold air is going to sink in the room. The cold air will be heavier, that will sink. The warm air in the room will rise above it. Warm air will come in to fill the place of the air that sank, and then that air in turn will cool off and drop. So you can get this kind of this cycle of air moving. And so sometimes, especially if people have like a tight curtain or something over their window, they may feel that convective air moving down underneath that, and they may attribute it to a draft when in actuality it's that kind of convective airflow coming. The great thing is that by updating storm windows, getting weather stripping on there, making sure things are tight, it can really reduce a lot of that. Can really reduce a lot of the airflow that's coming through. And then when you get that primary window combined with a storm window and you get a good tight fit, you want a relatively still pocket of air that's going to act a bit as an insulator. So you'll have less of that radiant cold coming through. Okay. Josh, ready for the next slide? Yeah, so I just spoke to some of the weatherization improvements that we can do. So here are some photos of work that we've done recently. So with the window on the left, that's showing new spring bronze with a bulb seal installed on the bottom of the window. A really classic issue is to shut a window, feel like everything's closed as tightly as it's gonna be, to still feel air coming down over the stool or the interior sill of a window. And we'll oftentimes see people putting, foam tape or stuffing a towel or something like that in there. And so for us, a very simple thing when we're in there repairing a window is to route a groove on the bottom of a sill of a sash, install a silicone bulb seal, and then you get a nice compression seal when that window is shut tight. We really like the spring bronze weather stripping for side jambs because it's a classic look. It dates back to about the year 1900, so it's truly historic. And once it's installed and installed well, and we see it as a permanent weather stripping. So up until when those sash boards break, we're going to have many decades of that spring bronze being in service, tightening things so that air isn't getting around the sash. Alison, do you have a preferred weather stripping style that you like to use?
Well, we see everything, and
Yeah.
my go-to is always spring bronze, but we also deal with the interlocking metal weather strip, which if you open your window and you see a metal fin on the sill, that was part of a system, and it should have pieces down the side and across the middle. It's a great system. It's very fussy. It's very prone to getting out of alignment, but putting it all back together is an amazing way to tidy up a window and get it to fit nicely. We do find that we have such a range of ages of windows that we have to kind of customize the weather strip options depending on what we encounter, whether how tight the window is, how loose it is, and also how much it gets used, because we can make a window really tight, but if somebody needs to open it to get fresh air and they can't because it's too tight, then we have over weather strip the window. So it's definitely a dance with the weather to try to find a good fit that still is operable.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, weather stripping is one of those things that, when it's aligned well, it's wonderful. If it gets misaligned or you have other tune-up issues, it's just not going to perform. And that's where, tune-up comes in as a great, relatively low-cost service. So then the center photo is showing just kind of a before and after contained within one window sash. You can see on the right side, there's so much putty missing that likely drafts are getting through between the glass and the wood. Whereas on the left side, once everything's being re-puttied, you're getting a weatherized seal where no water, no air are getting through where the glass meets the wood. And then on the right, that's an updated storm window. So, in our shop, we make traditional wood and combination wood storm windows. And so, for us, when we see an aluminum storm window, that's gonna, that aluminum is gonna aid in the radiation of cold. It's gonna help transfer cold into that pocket of air that you want to act as an insulator, so it'll cool it off. And you see glass that's sliding in a track. Those tracks tend to be pretty drafty. We also see, the blind stop is that surface where an aluminum storm window mounts to, and we see areas where they're not screwed in tightly. They don't have a continuous seam on the edge. So those are also areas where drafts are getting in. So if you're updating to a good storm window, whether it's a well-engineered aluminum storm window or some type of wood storm window, to get a good tight seal and a custom fit with jams that have settled is really important. So here's just an example of a storm window that we installed in the house just a couple weeks ago for a much tighter fit for this client.
I have to say, the number one way that I usually improve people's efficiency is by closing their storm windows. A lot of times, if a window has been painted shut in the summer season, they cannot open it to close or open the storm window. So a lot of times I become a hero just by closing their storm window for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I've definitely walked into assessments before where we'll look at the main level and I'll let people know, like, no, things are looking pretty good. And I'll say, well, wait till you see the bedroom windows. Those are the coldest. We make our way up there, and inevitably there's a couple storm windows that either are wide open or they're missing the glass panels. So it really does make a big difference. Yeah. All right. Slide, Josh. Yeah. So much of what we've talked about, again, it's these windows were made to be maintained, so they're not maintenance free. They do require maintenance over time, but that maintenance is relatively low cost, especially when you don't let things go too far. And even if you do have a window that's up for a process that we call full restoration, where we are doing a 2-month long process to restore the window back to more what it looked like when it was original. Even when we compare that cost against a replacement product, we consider the time horizon of how long an investment like full restoration of original windows will last versus a comparable price for a replacement product and how that may last. We really do see repair and restoration as a much more cost-effective approach over really any replacement product you might consider. And so for us, if we're looking at we're talking about like in the low hundreds to several hundreds of dollars for on-site mechanical work, weather stripping, spot putty, that kind of thing. Whereas if we get into full restoration, we're definitely going to be upwards of $1,000, could be up into the $2,000 range depending on the window size, what it needs, the divided light configuration, like those are all things that would have a factor in the cost. But when we hear about what some of the current prices are for name brand window replacements, our restoration prices are still very competitive. And what we're doing is we're taking a window that's been in use for, in some cases 100 years or more, or in Alison's case, 300 years or more, right? And we're giving that window an overhaul to set it up for another 100 years of relatively low maintenance time. Whereas if you take that 100-year-old window that isn't yet done providing service, and you put that in the landfill, you put a replacement product in, 10 to 20 years, 20 to 30 years, we could just maybe say on average 25 years is about what we're seeing before you end up with types of issues that really just warrant that whole window being replaced yet again. And so we see original wood windows as viable in perpetuity. So we see, hey, if this house is here, it's a 100-year-old house, we expect this house to be here in 100 years. Absolutely, let's go ahead and restore these windows. And so one thing I oftentimes talk to clients about is that concept of maintenance free versus something that's maintainable, right? So if something is maintenance free, it may be really easy to be the owner of that product while it's working, but once that product breaks, you're in a lot harder of a situation, and you're probably going to be looking at a much larger cost replacement project just to tackle that issue that you're facing. Whereas if you're looking at something that is maintainable, but that requires ongoing maintenance, yeah, maybe every 10 to 20 years, as part of a bigger exterior house painting project, you have your windows touched up for paint. Maybe you've got some old sash cords, every few years, maybe you call your neighborhood handy person, you learn how to do it yourself, you call a restoration company to come in and change out sash cords. It's a relatively low cost project. Again, broken glass, any neighboring hardware store can help you with a project like that. So for the types of clients who find us, who value that character that windows provide, that want to see reduced waste, and who just feel like, no, this is like they see themselves as stewards of their old home and want to carry that forward, it becomes a very easy choice to choose restoration and repair over replacement.
And if I could add, I also think it's a way to take stewardship of the community, because you are generally hiring people who are local. My crew ranges in age from 20 to 70 plus. And I always warn people when they come to work to us, like the minute you learn how to do this, all of your friends are going to be calling you, asking you to help them with their window issues. So we are teaching skills that benefit our whole community, because once people feel like they're empowered, they know how to do repairs, then they help other people do repairs. So it's a wonderful way to get everyone in the community. Nothing like old house owners to talk to old house owners. Everybody has their own network that they work within, but it is very much a community building kind of skill. Whereas replacement windows, they employ people. That's about it.
Josh, slide. Yeah, and so then we talk about the environmental benefits of restoration over replacement. I mean, it becomes pretty apparent. And so if we think about the embodied energy that is in existing buildings, existing building components, that's energy that's already been spent. And so for us, it's a very simple proposition to say, hey, let's invest in what's already here, versus adding to the landfill, creating a ton of waste, and starting a whole new resource extraction and energy consumption process. And then in addition to those points, we're also supporting local economies. Oftentimes there are community events around restoration and supporting local craftspeople, including folks who are emerging tradespepeople. And so if we think about the waste that could be produced from restoration versus replacement, if you're going to take out what I would call like a typical size residential wood window, you're probably looking, once you add up the sash, both upper and lower sash, you're taking out the weights, all those things, you're probably going to be close to 40 or 50 pounds of waste that's going to be removed. Whereas if we are focusing just on repair and restoration, yeah, there might be some glass that we have to change out. We'll scrape out some putty, or maybe all the putty comes out, and there's some weight to that. But it'd be really hard to get above 10 pounds of waste, and we're still keeping all those core building components intact. And so, one thing that's hard for us, we work really hard at being polite when we get these calls, but if I'd say we get maybe 1 or 2 a week where somebody will call us and say, hey, I've got all these old windows. Do you want them? Our answer, it's like, no, we want you to want them. Like, why are you offering them to us? Like, you should have those in your house. And so it's like folks make that choice to do a replacement project, and they end up with all these original window sashes sitting on their alley or in their garage, and they see that these aren't done, there's still something here, and so they're trying to find a home that isn't the dumpster. Well, in reality, the best place for those window sashes is in your home. And so we really want to make sure that we're getting to folks before they make that choice to replace, because once this whole material is gone, like, we're not going to get old growth wood back. It's gone. Like, yeah, we can, there are some places that make, replica wavy glass. Like, that's a key cool old house feature of these old windows, is the wavy glass, but it's really expensive to find and use replica wavy glass. And so we really want to do our best to keep that in use longer, both from a business standpoint and from an environmental standpoint. Like, it's really hard for us to see those name brand replacement companies doing work in our old house neighborhoods, because once they've done that swap out, like, it's a whole it's a whole house now that we have no ability to service with our unique trade skills anymore. I've heard folks joke around in the restoration community that, oh, they call them replacement windows because they have to get replaced so often, right? So and so we actually do need window replacement for buildings that were built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, because we actually get quite a few calls from folks who have houses that are in the 20 to 30 year age range, who are they have wood windows that are rotten beyond repair. They're looking for a repair or restoration option, and we don't offer that. We just don't have a developed trade for that, although there are some emerging businesses doing more like specialized rot repair for those kinds of things. So I mean, yeah, again, like, you can see, these piles of windows, and there really is a vast amount of waste for things that actually could have been maintained and stayed in service much, much longer. So I like this quote. This is a quote from Rose Marcario. She's the former Patagonia CDO and a business leader. And so she says that as consumers, the single best thing we can do for the planet is to keep our stuff in use longer. So of course she's coming at that from the idea of just like, hey, if we're going to make clothing, let's make clothing that lasts, that we can repair. Let's encourage our clients not to just buy the next new piece of fashion, but let's make quality clothing that's going to last. And we already have an old house building stock that was made with that kind of a mindset. And so we really want to make sure that we can be here and kind of spreading the word, and providing the service, keep our built environment in use longer.
Yeah, I went to an estimate this morning for an old house, and the minute I walked in, I'm like, well, you have replacement windows that were put in the 70s. And she's like, oh, can you put them back to look like original windows? And I said, we can, but there's nothing wrong with these. They need some maintenance. They did a good job of fitting them. So even though I would normally not work on a window built in the 1970s, these were actually built fine and they can be repaired. So again, every case is individual, and requires that we think about the whole cycle of building parts, not just, I don't like this window, I want to replace it. It's like, well, do you have to? And just think about what the considerations are for that whole process. So it is, we are recycling better than most. A lot of times we will even take like those big panes of glass, we'll cut them down for other windows. So we keep recycling the glass for a long time, which is traditional as well. But it is, I think that's one of the things that people are always kind of surprised about, is how environmentally concerned we are in our process. So we make sure we dispose of everything carefully. We try to reuse as many pieces and parts. I love it when people give us window weights. We will reuse them again. We use pulleys again. We will use old glass again. So it is very much a holistic type of work that we do to restore these windows.
Yeah. Yeah, and then again, as Alison mentioned, she's got a team of tradespeople that ranges in age from the 20s up into the 70s plus, and our team looks very similar. One of the neat things about finding this as a repair option as a homeowner, then shifting careers and starting a business on this, and then growing a team has been a really rewarding piece of this. Has been finding folks who are energized by this kind of work and giving them kind of a foot in the door at starting a career in the trades as well. It's a really different mindset that we bring, and we on occasion will find somebody who's been in a more conventional building trade and has gotten tired of seeing all the waste, tired of seeing a 10-year-old kitchen demoed for just a new countertop style or something. And so there's something that's really refreshing and really different about the mindset that we bring. And so kind of this piece about supporting local economies is that you're keeping money local. These dollar spends aren't going into the big corporations that are maybe outstate or somewhere else in the country, or for instance going off to vinyl window manufacturers in China. And so things are staying local, and you're supporting local economies through the tradespeople who are doing this work as well. I oftentimes feel like in the Twin Cities, it's a pretty big metropolitan area. So much of the work we do, I feel like it's just for neighbors who I haven't met yet. So it's a really
report. To our last slide, and then we can wrap it up and do some questions.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, great. Yeah, so just to review the points. So the five points that we identified were preserving historic charm and architectural integrity, honoring the durability, quality of original building components, and the repairability that comes with that. You can achieve energy efficiency and weatherization by maintaining these. The approaches that we take as a window restoration restorers are cost effective, and they withstand the test of time. And by doing all this, you're reducing waste, decreasing demand for new resource extraction and energy consumption, and you're supporting your local economies. So that sums it up. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to say thank you so much for this information. We have about 5 minutes left, and there's some questions in chat that I'll read out loud. I'm going to launch a very quick question from Build Reuse, just asking where people are located. So go ahead and fill that out. A couple of us had questions about whether or not one could actually repair windows where they exist either in old buildings, but the windows are newer, or in newer houses where, of course, the windows are newer. I heard several times the constant replacement. Once you replace old windows with newer ones, you're in that loop of having to do that. Is it possible to restore and repair windows that are post World War II, standard run-of-the-mill stuff we're seeing being installed today?
It really is case by case. Some windows that are more current are designed to be repaired. The vast majority are not. But it really is a case by case basis. And I think one of the good things about newer windows is a lot of them are tilt-in, so people can remove them and bring them to a shop to be evaluated. It's a much simpler process than taking apart an old window. So there are some that can be fixed. Not many, but there are some.
Okay. Great, thank you.
And also, we also see that there are companies that offer glass repair for insulated glass units, for double pane windows, and they can change out, like if the bulb seal or like the plastic bulbs on those start to go, those can be changed out. So yeah, there are repair options that you can take. It's just there's such a variety of things. Like when we're talking about a historic window for the region that we're in the Twin Cities, from like we work on windows from buildings that were built between the end of the Civil War, the American Civil War, and World War II. It's a very long period of time where very little changed. Once you get into the post-World War II area, there's just so much variety in what's out there. So that's where Alison's point about it being a case-by-case basis, like that's kind of the underlying reason.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Sad news, but reality, we get it. All right, the next question is, more questions are being added, so it changes my view. The question about double glazed versus single glazed. One person writes, I often encounter people saying you can't possibly get energy savings of double glazed with a single glazed solution. This is in commercial context. Is it possible to add an additional layer of glaze or double glazing into existing timber frames? And also, is there any experience that either of you have with triple glazing? There's a statement that I provided from University of Minnesota staff at our Center for Sustainable Building Research.
Yeah, so just real quick on the triple glazing, like no question that that's going to be a more efficient glazing situation, and you're getting they're getting really good results when they test those. Like absolutely, if you're doing a new build and your priority is energy efficiency, absolutely, like put triple glazing in for sure. If you're talking about retrofitting an old historic window sash with an IGU, with an insulated glass unit, you can do it, but it's not really a good idea. If any of you guys are familiar with the Build Show, Brent Hall has a phenomenal 10-minute long video kind of explaining the process where he takes out a sash, he has IGU and shows why it doesn't work. But what you're doing is if you take out the original single piece of glass and you were to go put an IGU in that got custom made to that, you need to route material away, so you're weakening the joinery that holds that sash together. And you then have about a 1/2 inch wide band of the goop that holds that sort of separates and creates a seal for that glass. And so you end up with either having to take more material away to account for that, or you end up with a really unsightly visual of like seeing that in what would normally be like the regular just light of the glass. And then you're taking something that with traditional glazing putty is a very simple ongoing maintenance piece to touch up, and you're putting something in that has a relatively short service life. So my understanding of an IGU is that most double pane windows that seal is warranted for about 10 years. And so you're putting in something that then is gonna, you can kind of expect it to fail at some point in that 10 to 20 year mark. And then you're then back to that cycle of having relatively low service life and then a lot more waste and expense to maintain it over time.
Yeah, and I would add that, again, a window is many components. Glass is only one of them. And doing something to the glass is usually not the best bang for your buck. A storm window is always going to be the best you can do. You're adding another pane of glass, but it's separate, it's maintainable, it's breathable, all those good things. So rather than mess around with fancy glass of some sort, I would much rather see a more holistic solution of weather stripping and storm windows and closing and locking your windows. It's just a more sustainable solution to energy efficiency.
That makes a lot of sense. I know that we're out of time, but we still have some questions, so we're going to continue on with them. Thank you for those that do have to jump off but joined us today. Presumably, Allison and Joe, that you're still available for questions.
Perfect.
So,
yep.
I didn't stop the recording. I'm not sure who did, but that's okay. So the next question is about bird-friendly windows. Can you make existing old windows bird-friendly to prevent bird collision?
I mean, the only thing I've ever seen to prevent collisions is aftermarket things that might be hung, either put on the glass or hung outside the glass. I'm not familiar with anything that we would do to the glass itself.
I saw
I've never seen anything about it.
Okay.
I have a storm window that a bird ran into, but I've never been asked to do anything about bird deterrence.
That's fair. There was a question about multi-family homes. What is your sense of the age of windows? Sorry, the question moved up with more questions coming in. I don't like that about Zoom. Here we go. What is your sense of the age of windows? And it happened again. This is frustrating. What is the sense of the age of windows in this type of housing stock in Minnesota, for example? Does the same opportunity for restoration exist in this sector? So presuming we're talking about older buildings with older windows, is that something that can be done? Adam, if you're still around, if you want to take yourself off mute and maybe specify a little bit more about your question.
Sure. Can you hear me Melissa?
Yeah.
I guess so. My organization just works with a lot of multifamily homes on waste reduction and reuse, more kind of conventional recycling. And I was just curious as to kind of the age of multifamily homes in comparison to single family homes. Like, are there a lot of, pre-World War II multifamily homes here in the greater Twin Cities metro? Not something I've really looked into before. So wondering if anyone has a better sense than me.
Yeah, I mean, we see quite a few. I mean, we see brownstones, we see apartment buildings that were built prior to 1940, and those all had the same windows that we see in the comparable era residential housing stock. We oftentimes have seen like, hey, those pain points pile up. The logistics of having repair folks come through maybe didn't add up, so we end up seeing a lot more like vinyl windows, like kind of like bottom of the barrel type products put into those buildings. But we have gone in and done repair work and restoration work on multifamily buildings in the Twin Cities. We just don't see as much of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
same here. I mean, Boston is famous for their triple deckers, as they're called, but three levels of apartments. And oftentimes it's difficult to get occupants or homeowners to agree on a solution for the whole building, but it's certainly doable. There's no reason why a multi-occupational house can be different than a single family house.
Okay, thank you very much.
Scrolling through questions. We're in the business, Todd Jones writes, of salvage and resale of reclaimed materials. Aside from what you have shared, is there anything we need to consider when reselling reclaimed vintage windows?
I mean, lead is always a big concern, so like for us as a residential contractor, our teams are all trained in the EPA, RRP, lead safety certifications. We also work closely with Minnesota OSHA to make sure that the folks on our team aren't getting poisoned by lead. And so if you are going to go sift through windows up at Bauer Brothers in Minneapolis, like, yeah, you can just assume that there's lead on most of the windows you're touching. And so if you're going to start to transport that stuff and move it around and maybe sell it or find a new purpose for it, I'd say lead would be the main concern. That and just like just safety concerns with broken or broken glass, joinery that could fail, that could expose sharp edges of the glass, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's that same problems.
Next question. Rot can be prevented by treating wood with preservatives such as borates. I'm curious whether you've used any treated wood for windows. If not, what makes people prevented from using treated wood?
We use borates when we have rot situations that we want to stop before they go. Usually we end up cutting out the rotted bits, but we do treat sometimes, especially on site stuff that needs to be repaired. We've come across treated wood as well. When we're doing new builds, we tend to, again, want to go with traditional materials like Eastern white pine, carefully selected. And then it's really more of the coatings and the maintenance of it than applying any preservatives to it. If a window can be kept free and air out, you end up eliminating a lot of problems just by doing that, just keeping it operable.
Yeah, that's right. And so similar here. We're usually removing rot material. We will on occasion do a borate type treatment. But so Alison mentioned that she's using like very carefully selected Eastern white pine. We tend to use here in the Midwest. It's easier for us to get a hold of vertical grain Douglas fir. So we'll use that where it's usually got a similar enough grain pattern. It stains up the same, has the same density as far as weight. And so we'll use that as a component part, or even if we're rebuilding a whole sash, we'll use vertical grain Doug fir. I saw a question about ash, like why is anybody using ash? And the issue if we were to use oak or ash or denser wood is that if we're putting too much of that denser wood in, when we go to put that sash back in, we're going to end up with an imbalance with the existing sash weights. And so, it keeps things simple by choosing a similar type species of wood. For our storm windows, we're using a kind of wood that is sold under the brand Accoya. And Accoya is a kind of wood that is the company that makes it, they're in the Netherlands, called Axis. They don't like to use the term treated wood. They say that the wood is modified. And so this is a wood that has gone through a process called acetylation. And so, like in layman's terms, it's put in the wood is put in these reactors, and it's pressure treated with a really, really strong vinegar type chemical. And then when it comes out of this process, they warranty the wood for 50 years against rot in applications where it's 8 inches or higher above ground. And they'll warranty it for 25 years against rot where it's within 8 inches of the ground to contact, or even submerged in fresh water. So that's a wood product, a new wood that we use, but because of that modification, because of having gone through this acetylation process, we feel really confident that we can make a storm window that's going to be a multiple decades long service life versus just maybe 10 or 20 years.
That's really helpful for context, especially with extreme weather events happening at a more extreme rate or more frequency, that sort of issue might be an increased issue going forward. Next question, I was thinking about this one too. Do you think there's a shortage of labor or companies that have the skill to do window restoration? If so, what is the solution?
The solution is through what Joe and I both do, which is community training. Most of the people who get into window restoration as a business started because they bought an old house. It's not rocket science. It takes 2 of these and a lot of patience and common sense, but there is nothing about it that any person who is interested couldn't do. One of the things I will say that gives me the greatest pleasure is when I hear about people who have become members of the Window Preservation Alliance and the support that they get from other people in this trade. We are probably the most collegial bunch of people you can imagine. We get calls all the time like, oh my God, I ran into this problem. What should I do? Where can I find this? How do I buy that? And so it's, we're all here to help other people get started in this business, be successful in this business. But it's also, it's again, it's a handyman kind of skill, your grandpa kind of skill. It's something that I encourage everyone to try. It does take a lot of patience, but I do encourage everyone to try.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one of my favorite moments in kind of in my early days doing this was it was my first summer with a team. 2 folks were inside. I went outside to, I don't know, work on a storm window or something, and the neighbor walked by, and she was an older woman, and she asked what we're doing, and she put her hands on her hips and she said, "They're paying you to do that? My grandpa taught me to do that when I was 5." So I was like, yeah, these are old, like what we're doing now as you know, home services, trade businesses. These were all like kind of in-house skills in earlier generations, and so these are things that as new windows came up, as counterbalance systems changed, like people just sort of like, as storm windows got put on that didn't allow easy access to do reputting and glass repair, these were all DIY skills that just kind of fell away over time. So fewer and fewer, you know, concentrations of the population knew how to do it. So it's like, to Alison's point, it's not hard stuff to learn. You just need to have the time, have the willingness, and have a place to learn it. So YouTube is great, you know, community level workshops are great. And then as far as like shortage of trade labor, I mean, I think there's like over the last 10 years, there's been a pretty big revival of businesses like ours coming up. And the WPA is a testament to that, of like the founding members of that, probably in the mid 20-teens, saying like, hey, like we see like the big replacement companies at the trade shows, and they've got their, you know, their fancy booths, like we need a place at the table. And so the WPA started to as a way to both create a place for these businesses to come together, but also to have kind of like a bigger seat at the table and more of a national, more of a national awareness. And so it's definitely growing. I think it's still on an upswing. But it's like, and also it's like one crass person to the next. Like we have a lot of folks in the WPA who are solo practitioners, or they maybe have one helper part-time. Then there are folks like Alison and I who've built, you know, pretty sizable teams. And part of that, it just comes down to personal preference and like, what kind of an organization do you want to run? But we definitely see a ton of interest, and we really haven't had an issue finding the right people to help grow our business. We're really lucky in that we've, we treat people well. We create a really good, welcoming place to learn this trade, and that it's kind of a flywheel effect where people see that the word spreads and more people want to be a part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
There's still a few more questions, so we're going to keep going through them. There's some concerns, and this is more of a statement than a question, of people who work in environmental health and safety, that there's concerns of lead paint and poisoning, things like that. And so with restoration, sometimes that material does get exposed. And so sometimes people have to weigh the differences between replacement and restoration for health and safety concerns, especially people that have young kids. So I don't know if there's anything you want to comment to that.
I will say that, I've been doing this for 21 years. Everything we assume comes in has lead paint on it. I have my crew tested every 6 months, and everyone is able to maintain a blood lead level that's below 10. So there are ways that you can do this work and be safe about it. And especially, I get it that it seems like pulling out something that has lead paint on it and replacing it with something that perhaps is made of vinyl is safer. I'm not sure about the long-term just viability of that, but certainly we have proven that we can handle lead paint safely for both the homeowner and for my crew. So I know it's a fear factor, but I think if we all just take a breath and, again, common sense, how do we control it? How do we mitigate it? It can be done.
I appreciate that. And I was hoping the answer would be similar to that is not something you ignore. It's something that you do focus on. And there was another comment similar to that particular one. But
I just wanted to mention too, we've also just anecdotally, we've had folks reach out where they've been, it's been a family with young kids, and they say, hey, we just had our kid just tested high for the blood level. We've got the old windows. That's probably the source. Like they've had an assessment done of their house, and there's like lead in the window trough. And so they've asked us to come out and do this restoration work, or even just to do jam specific painting. And so we've done that, come in using lead safe practices, done that paint prep where everything gets contained, cleaned up really thoroughly according to the EPA's guidelines, and done a primer and 2 coats of paint, and then some weather stripping to create a little bit of a barrier. And so by focusing on those friction points, removing lead in key areas, it's not abatement. We're not removing all the lead, but we're removing lead really thoughtfully in areas where we know friction and therefore dust is created. And then we've had those families call us up a year later and just to say, hey, just wanted to let you know, we just got back from the pediatrician, blood levels back down, we're in good shape. So those are just some anecdotes, but really rewarding things to hear, and just to know that you don't have to throw it all out just because you have this one concern. There are thoughtful ways that we can approach it.
Can you strip out the lead-based paint and repaint it with more modern paint versus maybe containing it by painting over it?
I mean, you can strip it out, but there is a kind of, I'm not sure the name of the tool, but there is like a kind of ray gun that you can point at paint to determine is there lead or not in there. And so you can take a piece of wood that's been painted for decades with lead paint, and that'll show positive. You can then strip that down to bare wood, and it will still show that lead is present on that bare wood. And so that's why I really don't like to use the term abatement, because there's just, in these old houses with so much paint piled up, there's just always going to be lead present. It's just a question of where is the risk of exposure coming from, and being thoughtful about how we prep and paint those areas.
But certainly eliminating flaking, peeling paint, it goes a long way to mitigating the harm. So sometimes that does mean just feathering it out and painting over it. As long as it's not actively falling out, causing dust, it's not a hazard.
Okay, great. I see the last question got answered by Joe in chat, so that's great. I think that wraps up our questions. We're well over time, and thank you both, Joe and Alison, for your dedication to this industry, but also your time that you gave to us today. Thank you very, very much. And join us in December. We have a potential opportunity to learn about deconstruction core classes that people can go through to learn how to be a deconstruction specialist. Stay tuned for more information on that. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.